I am pretty close to being the first person in my family to get a degree, so the amount of pressure to please my family is pretty high. I am the youngest out of four, and compared to the rest, I was given a better education. The rest were raised in a small poor country called Honduras. My parents have always pushed education on me since I was a kid, mostly because they only made it to the second grade, so they expected better from me. I was probably the only one in my family that even went to preschool or kindergarten. But there was tons of drama at home and eventually led to my parents separating. With all the fighting that was happening at home, I started to not care about school, especially after my uncle passed away. He was very close to my mom and me after the split. I almost never did homework, and I always hated reading. But eventually my dad remarried, and I found a new form of motivation: my stepmother, who was a fourth grade teacher at the time. Even to this day, I still hate going to school. A big part of my motivation to become a teacher was because of my stepmom. She would always tell me stories about her teaching, about how the school would always give her the quote unquote bad kids, but she'd turn them into angels at the end of the year, or how she'd teach them to speak English while teaching their timetable at the same time, since most of these children were from different Spanish speaking backgrounds. I remember on rare days I was able to go with her to her class and watch her teach. She was just so awesome in the way she taught because she actually cared. Working in a low income community with kids whose parents probably worked in the fields and knew very little English to begin with was not easy, but she made it happen. She was the best teacher I've ever seen. Every kid wanted to be in her classroom. I understand that teaching is not easy. Trust me, my stepmom makes that very clear every time I go home to visit. I also understand that there's more to being a teacher than just teaching itself, but understanding your students and where they came from as well. My stepmom would tell me the hard lives these kids had when they went home, which is why she felt like it was her job to make sure that school is a place where can feel safe, have fun, and know that people around them care. The helping aspect of teaching is probably what really makes me want to be a teacher, because my life was not easy growing up as well. Both my parents moved to America in the 80s, so they had very little money. On top of that, they ended up getting divorced when I was 3, so that didn't make things easy for me for the next 15 years. Going to school was never a good time for me, just always felt like prison to me, especially as a kid. I grew up very quiet and shy, so being in a classroom with the same people all year was irritating, especially when you and your friends didn't end up in the same classroom. I was bullied so much, and I'd never tell anyone because I was never able to build a close relationship with my teacher because of how nervous and shy I was. When I become a teacher, I'm going to make it a goal that I learn about every student in my class, considering it's elementary. Whether my students like me or not, I want to make sure I know as much about them as I can so I know how to work with them. I never want my own students to ever feel excluded from anything. When I teach my own class, I'm going to try my best to make sure my classroom is like a family. In case any of my students are struggling with life back home, at least they know they have a loving family at school that he or she can turn to. I hope that in the future, if I do become a teacher, that my students look up to me, or at least in some way I change their lives. The best stories I hear from my stepmom are the ones when she randomly goes to Walmart or something, and a student she had like 10 plus years ago goes up and talks to her. The joy she feels when she hears about her old students and how they're doing now almost makes her cry every single time, especially when that student tells her how much of an inspiration she was as a teacher and how grateful they were to have her as a teacher.